Good morning. Good morning to all of you. We would like to welcome you today to the first event here at the Africa Pavilion at COP27. And we are meeting today uh, on a topic dealing with the decarbonizing Africa industry, overview of the current state of play, key issues, and the role of the private sector. My name is Chiza Charles Chiumia. I am the acting director for industry, minerals, entrepreneurship, and tourism at the African Union Commission. When you meet me in the corridors, you can call me Charles. Given the theme that we are working on, I tried to look in my wardrobe if I have anything green. Um, the only thing I found was a tie. But I see that Dr. Amane, I think she's the winner in this gathering. So we are here trying to go green, and we thought, what is the best way of doing this? And I think involving the private sector was something that really echoed very deep in our minds at the African Union Commission. We would like to thank all the co-organizers of this event this morning. I might be not excessive in mentioning them all, but we had support from the African Business Council. We had support from Afrexim Bank. We had support from the UNECA. And we also had support from GIZ. Yes, my colleague is also telling me that there was PTB, UNDP, yes. We also have support for UNDP. I see Joy here and the executive director. We really want to thank you for the support that you gave us in coming up with this event. So the main objective of our event this morning is to have a dialogue on examining the potential costs and likely benefits, as well as opportunities across the value chain and the whole idea of industrial development in the continent. And probably maybe brainstorm on what actions, strategies, and policies that can help us to decarbonize industry. The idea is to have a view to make industry, African industries and economies very competitive and deliver an inclusive and sustainable development for the African continent. So this is a short background to our gathering this morning. So basically, I'll run through the program we have for you. First of all, we are going to have some opening remarks from the various dignitaries that are here. I'll be calling each one of them on stage. They will deliver their remarks in about 5 minutes each. And thereafter, we'll have a presentation on the title of our gathering, Decarbonizing African Industry. And after that, we are going to have a panel discussion on the issue. And we have 4 or 5 panelists that are going to give us their expert views on the issues under discussion. Then we will open the floor to all of you to also make your own contributions on the theme. Then we will have some concluding remarks. We believe this activity is going to take us for about 1 hour, 30 minutes. And I just pray that we all be together until we conclude so that we come up with the tangible way forward on some of the programming that we can take forward going into the next year. So without wasting further time, first of all, I would like to call Dr. Amane Asfu. She's the president of the African Business Council, a very well-known private sector, do I call you activist? Since we're dealing with climate issues here. But Dr. Amane, you have the floor. Thank you. Let's give a hand to her as she comes.
Thank you, my brother. So, it's my real pleasure to be here with this powerhouse of distinguished stakeholders that would really, really, really change the whole world. My brother, Your Excellency, Commissioner Albert Moshenga, my dear sister, Commissioner Josefa, my very dear sister, Ahuna, UNDP Africa Regional Director, my dear sister, Hanan, the Executive Secretary, the Deputy Executive Secretary General, and my brother, Antonio, the Acting Executive Secretary General for ECA. My dear brothers and sisters, my sister, Merit, acting for the Africa Mineral Development Resources Center, all my dear brothers and sisters here. This is really a historical moment for us as African continent, and how all of us unite our efforts for not only the decarbonization for Africa's industry, but the acceleration of our African industries, because without industrialization, we will have nowhere to go. It is time that we join hands as partners present here all together. I believe this is the most important session, and that's why it is very important for us as few stakeholders here to put a roadmap for our real industrialization through different capacities. As Africa Business Council, and all of you know that it's established in line with the Heads of States Decision Summit to be the private sector arm of the African Union. What we have to do as private sector, our strategy is 3 pillars, and that's how all of us can come together. Private sector strengthening, including SMEs, women and youth, how we strengthen the capacity of our private sector organizations for all the industrialization procedures that we need. The second issue is the policy advocacy. What are the policies we need from the governments and legislators to have incentives for our private sector? And the third pillar is about product development. How we have a made in Africa competitive, standardized, value-added, competitive product that we can compete with the whole world. So here in the COP27, it is the COP for implementation. It's the COP for action. So it is also the COP for us as Africa. We are not the one who polluted the planet, but Africa suffer. Now we want to see how Africa save the world, because this is our role. We in Africa have all the natural resources. Instead of bringing all the natural resources outside the continent to be industrialized, we need to keep our raw materials within the continent to be industrialized within the continent. So in what ways really we should do that? We should do this. For us, it is very important to have this policy advocacy. How does the government promote the investment for our African private sector and put incentives, and to see how the financial institutions can finance our African private sector with very low interest rates. We need a real restructuring for all the financial institutions to see how also to mobilize our African investments. And with this, the governments are also demanded to have not only incentives, but to see how when an investor puts the money in this country, he can get it back. So the whole issue of investment policies should be really reformed and revised. And that's why at Africa Business Council now we will have a real survey with reference to the investment laws in each country, so we are able to have the investors come and invest in industrialization. The second issue really about policy advocacy is we need to have at least 40% of all government procurement goes to African private sector with African products. Because if we don't empower our African private sector to have tenders from the governments, who are going to take it? The multinational companies who are industrializing outside, who is polluting the whole world? It is time that we own our destiny by ourselves as Africa. It is time that if we talk about decarbonization for Africa's industry, how do I harness the whole solar energy, the sun? We are blessed by the sun, by the wind, by the water. How can we transform this into real energy, clean energy that will start our industrialization accelerate our development, realize the Africa we want. And this also by supporting our small and medium enterprises, because we need to upscale our SMEs with reference to agriculture, agri-processing, with reference to mineral development resources. We have all the minerals of the whole world. How do we really have new techniques for extractive industries, but also to have value addition for our minerals on the continent? It is very important that when I talk about the product development and about standardization for agriculture products and green economy, that we promote the whole issue of green economy. How does this green economy lead us to decreasing for the carbon emission? How do we have the financial institutions finance bankable green projects that would really empower our African private sector? So we really need to put a roadmap for all of us to see how can we do this. Where are we going from COP27, which is implementation? The carbon credits and the carbon debt, as we heard. Africa have less than 2% of all this decarbonization of carbon emission. It's the industrialized company. So they have to have this carbon debt that they owe us. And Africa, when we invest in green projects, we have our carbon credit. So this is really how we have the climate justice across the whole world. If we're talking about our rural women, and I always don't forget it because they are the majority of our African continent, our rural women are still suffering now to walk to get trees, to wood, for fire. This is deforestation. This is carbon emission. I need to supply for them clean energy. Solar dryers, solar cooking, clean cooking oil. How do I do it? It cannot happen by itself. That's why also we need to empower our cooperatives, because this is the majority for Africa. Our cooperative within our African continent is a huge power that we are not harnessing them. How do I strengthen those cooperatives to make sure that they empower our local communities, they empower our rural women? They don't have to walk 4 kilometers to get clean energy or clean water or whatever. So this is really the partnership that we are working here together. And I'm very happy our champion for our private sector is our brother, Ambassador Albert Moshenga. He is pushing for the private sector to be part and parcel of all the policy organs, because this is what we need. My sister, you are the one who is leading all this rural development, rural economy, and all this sustainable development. Sustainable development can never happen unless we really invest, all of us together. My sister Ahuna, you are there, you have a great vision for partnership. You have great vision for supporting our startups. Our startups with green economy, with green innovation, how can we help them to flourish and to upscale their companies? It's a holistic approach. My brother Antonio, my sister Hanan, ECA has a great power on the continent. That's why I say this gathering is the most important gathering. We have also with us the Afri-Exim Bank, the Africa Finance Corporation, how the financial institutions of Africa can finance our real development. The Africa we want is a prosperous, peaceful, integrated Africa driven by the citizens of Africa. We are the citizens of Africa. How do they expect for us really to work as private sector without the partnership of everybody? The industrialized countries are already there. They are the one who really made all this pollution. How can we make it happen? How can Africa save the world? With empowering our real private sector, with coming together. That's why under Africa Business Council we have different clusters, and those clusters speaks to the Africa we want. We have trade, we have investment, we have industry, we have clean energy, we have agriculture, agribusiness, we have tourism and hospitality industry, we have financial and financial services cluster. We have more than 20 clusters that speaks to the green economy, speaks to the green industrialization, to the blue economy, the blue ocean economy. Africa is surrounded by more than 18,000 nautical miles across the shores and the whole oceans and Mediterranean and Red Sea and all the oceans. Nobody's harnessing the aquaculture, the fisheries, the fish farming, the blue economy. How are we going to really realize this? There is a lot of policies, but what we need is implementation. And implementation can never happen except all of us coming together to empower our African private sector. So for this, I say, all of us here, the Africa we want is Africa, independent Africa. Dependent Africa to have our own financial independence to give us the power of choice and voice. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amane. I hope you believe me what I said at the first. From what we have heard. Yes, Africa can decarbonize, and the good thing is that technology now is allowing us to have the choice on how we do this. Thank you once again. Now I would like to call on the stage Dr. Elias Kagunya, is the Chief Risk Officer at Afreximbank. Dr. Elias, you have the floor and 5 minutes to deliver your opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning once again. Your Excellency Albert Muchanga, Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry, and Minerals, all protocol observed, ladies and gentlemen. I bring greetings from the African Export-Import Bank. I would like to, first of all, start by extending our apologies from Professor Orama, the President and Chairman of the African Export-Import Bank. He's unable to join you this morning at this important occasion because he had to, unfortunately, travel. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's no doubt that Africa is facing a major challenge. My sister has gone through the details of that. I think we've been re-echoing the fact that we are not at the same playing field when it comes to these issues around decarbonization. Our narrative is clear as an African continent, and I think we need to continue to emphasize that difference. In one of the recent speeches, I think here we had an AU day, the President of the African Export-Import Bank made it clear that we cannot be talking about decarbonization when we haven't even carbonized. Our narrative has to be extremely clear. For us at the African Export-Import Bank, we are fully aware of our role in terms of addressing the adverse impacts of climate change and ensuring that we have a cohesive strategy as an African people to make sure that our priorities for energy, if you think about 600 million people without electricity, 900 people without clean cooking energy, if you think about the fact that we export raw materials, natural resources, only to import them back as finished products. If you think about the fact that shipping on its own is one of the top largest emitters of carbon emissions. In fact, 3.1% higher, than all the African entities combined together. It leaves no doubt for us as the African Export-Import Bank that economic empowerment for the African continent will only come as a result of African countries trading with one another. As a trade finance bank, I think we've emphasized the fact that the AFCFTA is the only vehicle that will hand us that economic empowerment as a continent. And we are behind that. We are supporting that. We're working closely with the Secretariat because we believe that through the AFCFTA, we will be able to industrialize. We will be able to localize. We will be able to ensure that our regional and local value chains on the continent are developed so that we can produce, we can add value, we can trade with one another. And that includes the latest topic at this COP, which is around carbon credits. We believe that carbon credits are a tradable commodity, And we believe that working with the AFCFTA, we should be able to work together, together with the African Carbon Markets Initiative, which was also launched recently on the sidelines of COP, to create the necessary infrastructure, registries, ability to validate and verify carbon credits, trade them. Because on the African continent, we have the potential. A number of our countries like Gabon have already taken steps ahead. But if you look at challenges they are facing, pricing, you know, there's transparency issues there around pricing. If you consider the price per ton of carbon, Gabon is getting $8, compare with in Europe, 25 above. We need to stop that. And I think collectively, as Africans, we need to look beyond our individual country challenges, work together. At the African Export-Import Bank, we strongly believe in partnerships. So we welcome the SEMI initiative. We welcome the work that is being done by the AFCFTA, Ambassador Mchanga and his team as well. And we look forward to partnering with them to ensure that we decarbonize to the extent that we have carbonized, but as much as possible ensure that we develop. We provide energy, clean energy for our people. We exploit our resources in a manner that is reasonable, but also doesn't put our countries at risk from an economic and growth perspective. Lastly, we should be able to shape our own narrative as an African people on these matters regarding climate change, to ensure that whatever action we do does not undermine our initiatives and agenda under Agenda 2063. And as such, just to re-emphasize again, we believe that the AFCFTA and the industrialization agenda are core to that objective. The bank, the African Export-Import Bank, has practical ideas that we will be discussing, we would like to discuss further with the EU and other partners on the continent to ensure that collectively we move forward. Together with partners, the AU and the rest, we make sure that we forge our own future when it comes to issues around climate change, green financing, and making sure that we all look towards a brighter Africa, Africa that is green, but also Africa that has energy, Africa that has developed through its own initiatives and not anybody's narratives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elias. One catchword from you: we need to work together as African countries. I think that is very key, and the FCFTA indeed gives us a chance to do that. Without wasting further time, may I call upon Her Excellency Madam Ahuna Eziakoa, the Assistant Administrator and Director of UNDP Regional Bureau for Africa. Madam.
Commissioner Mchanga, all protocol observed. I think we need to get down to the meat of the discussions here. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to my sister and to also African Union for this opportunity. A lot already said, so what can I add? You know, I was resident coordinator of the UN in Ethiopia a few years ago. And one of my, I would say, proudest moments was for an organization like the UNDP to be called upon, relied upon by a nation like Ethiopia to support it, to accompany it in its ambition to build green industry and to have a climate resilient economy. So what did Ethiopia do? Ethiopia went ahead and established the Climate Resilient Green Economy, CRGE, facility. This was quite a few years ago. We're talking here about decarbonization and industry. We have African countries that have already invested in this in a real way. So they not only institutionalized the concept, the idea that their development pathway could become green, they also went ahead and started to invest financial as well as human resources in making that happen. So you look at some of the features of that, and I just was looking at something on the internet in relation to Ethiopia's story, and it narrates, I'm going to read it because it's interesting. The Halkin waste-to-energy power plant taking shape on the edge of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital, symbolizes ambitions to convert the agrarian Horn of Africa country into an eco-friendly industrial powerhouse. And it then goes ahead to say that the government's $120 million REPI project being built to EU emissions standards will incinerate the city's rubbish to generate 50 megawatts of electricity. A computer-generated image on display at the site shows the future factory shrouded by a tree-filled park. In about a year, green cutting-edge REPI will replace a vast rubbish dump picked over by hundreds of scavengers. Currently toxic effluent from the landfill seeps into the nearby rivers when it rains, and methane perpetually drifts into the atmosphere. And this plant is just one facet of Ethiopia's 4-year climate-resilient green economy. We've also seen eco-friendly industry being built in that country, with spillage now accommodated in such a way the oil spillage is captured so that it doesn't go into the water. It cost Ethiopia $30 million to bring a private entity that could put in that technology. This is happening in Africa, much more than we've seen in many advanced economies. So Africa is already on the path towards decarbonization. And I think this needs to be acknowledged, that African countries, if you look at all the nationally determined contributions that are so ambitious that African countries have committed to, you would see this story of an ambition to be green in its industrialization. But Africa must industrialize, right? You know, we're saying the contribution to emissions right now is just minimal. That's because there's no industrialization on the continent, right? But it doesn't have to even go above that if the commitment to green pathways is enacted. And so Africa stands still to be the region that could make the most significant contribution to the world's decarbonization agenda. But Africa needs to be accompanied to do this. Not in the name of charity or handouts. Africa is not begging here. The strategy is there. The political will is there, the human assets, but also other resources are there, and Africa is already on the path. But it cannot be seen here as going it alone. And it cannot be seen as having to beg for that. There is also the reality of the impact that Africa faces as a result of the ills created by others. Loss and damage is now part of the conversation here. Now, we have to get aggressive on that. It's not just going to happen because the world thinks it's a fair thing to do, it's a just thing to do. Politics elsewhere is going to come against the force of this agenda. And it is up to African leaders and African people, activists, young and old, to maintain a consistent pressure that the reparations, that climate justice has to become part of our civilization in the 21st century of this commodity.